Hello again, I'm Rob Smith of the In the Black Quant Edge VTF here at T3 Live with Quant Edge 4-week coaching program, week 3 on broadening formations, video number 2. And in the previous video, I reminded you that if you're having any problems with actionable signals and time frame continuity, go back and make sure you have a handle on that, because this is getting a lot more complex and how we tie it together. But those concepts very important to have a firm grasp on before we move on here, because this is really going to continue to be important as we tie it all together. All right. So once again, it's like we talked about the proof of the broadening formations, the actionable signals with broadening formations, and we're going to get into the support and resistance and all this kind of stuff this time. But just from the last time, remember we talked about an outside bar, right? There's also a fractal triangle, right? That means taking out both sides of the range. That's a fractal triangle. Thus, all one bar rev strats to take out both sides of an inside bar and one are broadening formations on a fractal basis. They have to be. And since broadening formations represent price discovery, the failed breakout of any range increases the probability of testing the other side of the range, right? It also increases if we have an actionable signal triggering the initial reversal to do it, all right? Because as we'll see, test the side of the range, test the other side, right? If things traded in horizontal lines, it would be very simple. Those tests would be right to the penny. We know that they're not, based on the fact that outside bars exist. All right. So remember, any actionable signal reverses back to the previous range, possible potential to test the other side, right? Okay. So once again, it's commonly believed that support and resistance lines are horizontal. However, because it does not allow for time, this can be easily dismissed. This is not true. All right. As time passes, the price discovery does not reclaim the previous range. The leftover losing positions will continue to unwind and drift further apart. All right. So we'll get to that. All right. So we got here, once again, so if we go here, in this example, the broadening formation is created from a shooting star reclaiming a previous range. So how can we identify that? Well, we can look at here. All right, first of all, you got an outside bar here, right? But then, so this is going to, and there's a fractal triangle in itself. But in here, we're just going to see the slight higher high, the slight lower low. We go to the higher high and take out this previous range. Then we get the shooting star. At that point, if this price discovery is being rejected, we get the shooting star that then takes out this here, expands this range, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And has an outside bar back here, fractal triangle, that this also came back in to expand that range. Boom. Section 3. Broadening formations become support and resistance levels, although I don't like to use that term. But they're the phenomena of things drifting away as time passes, as opposed to the horizontal lines. Very important, and oftentimes you'll see this to be almost uncanny, right? Because it's commonly believed that support and resistance lines are horizontal does not allow for time again, right? Time passes. People will move their perception, all right, of cheap and expensive changes. Also, as losers drift away from them, they're still trying to get out of them. Right? That's why this occurs. So once again, when we draw this line here, remember we have the outside bar, but when we draw this, after this bar closes below these lows, this now going lower becomes resistance. Now you can test it like anything else, but the triangles become resistance as they go back down. So it expands, comes back, closes on this, all right? And we'll get to more of that. But they become support and resistance lines as time goes by, and that's why we can look for the combinations of these as well. So if you look at this sequence in Union Pacific, you'll see this here. We come into here, We've got the slight lower low off of there, slight higher high of that. Goes slight higher high again, trying to go momentum hammer into the highs. Does not. Then drops back in to take all of this range out. Price discovery, are we going higher? Are we going lower? This broadens, comes down into here, reclaims all this stuff by going all the way through. Broadening formation continuation. Now it gets through here, and as you can see here, rides the top of this as it drifts away from this group. Slightly higher, slightly higher, slightly higher. And so what we'll look for once again is a new series. Slight lower low, slight higher high, slight lower low. This triangle now is the bottom of this triangle riding the top of support like this. This is how we look for continuation patterns. All right? The old triangle becomes support. The new triangle price discovery comes off and then reclaims a range here and goes back to the highs. Section 4, time frame continuity with broadening formations. So oftentimes when people first start to see this stuff and first start to learn it, how can we have full time frame continuity to the upside if we're at the bottom of the triangle? Obviously, the price has been dropping, right? It can still occur off the bottom of a broadening formation, even the price has just recently hit a new low. It depends on when it happens, right? So when things occur is how that works, right? So time is always an important element for us. When do these breakouts occur, right? So let's take a look at the IWM real quick. If we look at this monthly chart of the Russell small cap, you see slight higher high, slight lower low, slight higher high, come all the way back down here. You'll also see this bar here was outside. Right? There's a fractal triangle right there. So is this. Right? But you can see testing the lows, testing the highs, testing the lows, testing the highs. Shooting star monthly reclaims the level. Right? Drops all the way and takes all of this stuff out. So at this point, anytime that these things were down here, right? The price was below all this stuff. Month was red, no question about it. So the question is, how can we turn that back into full time frame continuity coming off the bottom of the triangle? We want to reclaim this level, right? Which we do, it comes and forms a hammer. So as we've talked about in the previous sections of the course, we want to look for actionable signals that what will it create if it works? If we go back to the weekly, you're going to see this, the weekly hammer here. At that point, although the monthly is red, it's actionable signal to the upside on the weekly with the daily and the 60 in control. Momentum hammer. If this works, what will it create? It creates the monthly hammer right at the level we want, right here. Now, full time frame continuity, the upside actionable signal hammer here to reclaim back into this stuff. Very nice stuff, and you can even see here, this is the fractal triangle here, and right now, we're in inside bar slightly above that. This outside bar, very important as of right now. If we take a look at the daily, we can also see this. Here was that daily triangle. Goes up, gets through it, comes back and tests right to the line, and goes actionable signal right here. All right. Inside day, off to the races. So you will continually see this kind of stuff, support and resistance, as it moves higher. If we go back to the weekly too, remember when we go back to the monthly, when we're looking for this to complete, once it gets back in here, now we're looking to go test the highs again. When we come through, the triangle has successfully grown. And so when you see this outside bar, what caused all this And since we know what that triangle looked like, if you go here after the election, and we know that this larger scheme is playing out, and you look at the weekly, you're going to see an outside bar here. You're going to see an outside bar here. You're going to see an outside bar here. And now to reclaim this, and this, kicking pattern on the weekly wipes them all out. Full-blown reversal, which continued. All right. Section 5, combining outside bars with actionable signals. All right. Once again, since outside bars must be broadening formations, we can use them in conjunction with actionable signals to identify range expansions. Right? So as we've been looking at, we want to use them to identify when they're coming back into the range to go test the other side, or when things are really moving and they're actually expanding. Right? That's what we want as well. So if you look at this monthly chart here, outside bar, that's a fractal triangle, we know that, all right? In order to trigger that, we got the inside week, all right? So inside week here expands the range. Now we know we need to stay outside of this, right? This is an outside bar, but once we get outside of there, we don't want to see it reclaim. Otherwise, we can look for a test to the other side, but that's not what happened in this case. Inside weak breaks to the upside, causing this range expansion. Then if we break it down further, since we know this is a fractal triangle, we can look for that signals above that for more range expansion. So in this case, in order to determine if the range expansion broadening formation will continue, we look for those lower time frames. So in this case, you can see this here. The higher high, the lower low, higher high, lower low, comes back up, then gets through this. It sits there, goes inside day momentum hammer. At this point, this is a VGO, when it broke to here, it was an outside month to the upside with full time frame continuity to the upside, with the actionable signal being an inside day momentum hammer. Boom and gone. These are the combinations we're going to constantly look for. Section 6, using broadening formations to time actionable signals. All right, this is very important. If you don't know this, this is why some people will just take the inside bars and the actionable without knowing how everything's lining up. So we can use these, all right, formations to trigger them. So just caution is needed when trading anything that's still forming an inside bar. We talked about that, going back and forth, tight. The range is tightening, right? That's why we consider it consolidating, something that's still forming an inside bar on any longer-term time frame. But however, as the time goes along, what it does not just form that inside bar over time, right? Also, because there'll be smaller price discoveries, right, will form new price broadening formations on the inside internally, right? So an inside bar is a contraction. However, it can be formed by a tightening formation of expansion, much like the inside, outside, inside. So when we combine the three truths of inside bars, time frame continuity, and price discovery broadening formations, this is how we can successfully time these future breakouts and reversals, right? We want to look for all this stuff to line up, combination. So if we take a look at Target, all right, Target, perfect example. Right, the weekly chart of Target shows the internal triangle. You'll see this here: lower low, higher high, lower low, higher high, and then finally resolving all the way down to the downside. Right, and it was a longer term signal. The reason we call that an internal triangle is because it formed during an inside bar. It formed during this inside month here, which, if we go back in time, was multiple inside pattern. This bar, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months completely within this bar's range. So, as this formed in here, what did we also know to be true? We also know we have another fractal triangle here, as this triangle was formed completely within this bar's range. Then, the consolidation causes the inside month, and as the broadening formation continues, here, we also got the inside week over here. When that inside week broke, it reclaims this level and breaks all the way back down, taking now actionable signal of inside month to finally cause the range expansion of this, causing the range expansion of that. See you later, bye. Okay, so once again, we can combine all three truths of inside bars, time frame continuity, price discovery, broadening formations. We can successfully do this because at this point, right, we were able to identify the broadening formation series. We were able to identify the weekly inside, the monthly inside, and as they broke with full time frame continuity to the downside. All three were aligned. That's what we want, right? We want to be able to do that, and that's the difference between when you hear me talk about trading momentum. If you're trading momentum, right, that's going back to what we just showed. The outside bar expansion needs to go, right? We can still trade that, but they need to go because if they fail, they will reclaim the previous level. That's a problem, right? And that's when people get into a lot of trouble by not getting out in that situation. Right, things can reverse violently, as we've seen. Right, so that's the difference between trading momentum, but you can do it using the triangles to expand. But also in this case with target, we can combine everything we know to be true to time it when it's finally going to break out and when it's going to occur. Section 7. Drawing the broadening formations. This is possibly the question I get asked about the most, right? Outside of the ref strats. Drawing the triangles. How do we draw the triangles? Okay, first things you have to remember. These physical lines that we draw on the charts are only visual representations, all right, of what we know to be true. They're subject to change any time we have a change in time frame continuity, a new day, a new week, a new month, a new 60. They're subject to change, right? Or anytime the price achieves any recent higher high or higher low, that we are at triangle risk, right? We want to know that. So the importance isn't always drawing the lines, knowing where the triangles will be, knowing where these reclaim levels are. So once again, it's like if we see the outside month that formed during the multi-bar pattern, this thing. So what do we know to be true about that? Fractal triangle. All right. So if we draw off any series of higher highs and lower lows, you can see this. All right. Here's some lows, here's some highs, and it comes right down into it. Right. So that's one way you could draw it. Right. Okay, however, since an actual signal does not form until the time period of the bar is complete, right? It's not an inside bar until it closes. We want to draw the triangles after a change in time frame continuity. So as soon as the day goes out, draw if it's a higher high, draw the triangles off that. New week, something like that. And you want to draw backwards from the recent highs and lows. right? So you're drawing backwards. You go to the high, draw it backwards. So in this case, right, you could here we had that original one drawn, and it gets below it, which becomes resistance to try and get back in there. However, because it went into lower lows, you could also draw like this. Lower low. Now it went down, closes out again. Now you got another lower low. So at this point, it's going to be trapped between this old one here and there. If you try and think in these terms, you'll get very confused. Right? You get very confused. And that's why the drawing of the triangles isn't as important as understanding where they would be. Right? And always looking across. Right? Across to the reclaim levels. All right. All right. So finally, drawing the triangles only helps to visualize the range expansion. You can see it, and oftentimes when you start to do this, you'll see how uncanny it actually is. But it's much more important to look for a change in time frame continuity with actionable signals that reclaims a previous range. That's when they're at risk of triangle risk, broadening formation risk, right? I cannot stress this point enough, all right? And so the drawing themselves can be helpful. But when we know we have two other universal truths that we are dealing with, we first want to just go down the line. What do we know about all three? If you try and trade using any one of the universal truths by themselves, you're going to get in trouble. If you try and use only two, you're going to get in trouble. You need to understand that all three matter, right? And that's why and how we can use the broadening formation combined with what we already know about actionable signals and time frame continuity. So this will conclude video 2. We'll be back and we'll look at some more charts.